Thank you. Thanks very much, Richard, for inviting me to be part of this discussion. Thank you to all the other panelists who've spoken before me. So I was speaking and contributing ideas about generosity. And as Richard mentioned, the thoughts I'll be sharing are based on an article I wrote this summer for the Architects Journal. And the premise was to describe your favorite thing as an architect. And like most architects, keeping all options on the table for a very long time is important. So I didn't pick just one thing, I picked three things. Chimamanda Adichie's Half a Yellow Sun novel, which is about the Nigerian Biafra War, and the South Bank Centre in London, particularly a window seat in the National Theatre, and also a door handle at the Royal Festival Hall. And I picked these things because for me, they really embodied the things that I find generous in architecture and relating to architecture. So I don't just see generosity as providing for architecture, it's also the things that architecture then provides for daily life. So in novels and fiction, there is a sense of kind of richness of writing and making places. And architecture is the same. Before a building becomes real, it's inherently a figure of our imagination. We're thinking and dreaming up new places and new things. And there's an imperative there to be generous in that dream. And then in terms of making places, I think I picked the window seats I did at the National Theatre because it feels like a really special place to be able to sit in a kind of large public institutional building, but also feel very at home and very sort of cozy and looking out over the city and London's kind of largest public asset, the River Thames. And then also looking at detail and looking at the detail of a door handle feels like a very tactile thing. So I'll be expanding a bit on those ideas. And also wanting, through this presentation, wanting to touch on questions set out here. So what is the role of economy in making a civic and public world? How do we evoke generosity within harsh economic realities? Generosity, economic and generosity, are these in opposition? What is the role of detail and material in conceiving generosity? And finally, what does economy mean beyond the financial, calculable and measurable? I chose to include this drawing actually, because it's a drawing from my first year. So forgive me, this was about 4 months into starting architecture. But for me, it became a really important drawing. And I actually found myself returning to when I was writing the short piece for the AJ, because it's of the South Bank. And for me, the South Bank is a crucial place in terms of my reflection on architecture and London as a city. So I studied undergrad at Kingston, and it was my first kind of time really living in London. And the South Bank became a place that I found kind of generous in London's kind of urban public realm. And increasingly, it's becoming one of the only truly public spaces in London, and the highly kind of where public space is now quite privatized actually. You start to realize that the South Bank is really quite a gift. And this is the door handle that sparked my reflections that I wrote for the AJ article, but also the things I'll be talking about today. It's a door handle to the Royal Festival Hall with showing the kind of engraved door handles. And this image is really quite special to me because it marks a conversation between my first year tutor and I, Lorna Davis. And I remember it so vividly. We were walking along South Bank on a class field trip, and as a kind of nervous 19-year-old, fresh to architecture, kind of struggling to make sense of whether I enjoyed architecture or kind of what I thought of it. And I remember Lorna stopping at this door as we were walking to the Royal Festival Hall and commenting on how beautiful this door handle was. And there was a moment I thought, a door handle, really? I can't imagine somebody has such loving things to say about a door handle. And then I remember then returning to it years later and also reflecting and thinking, actually, it's kind of brilliant. It's beautiful, and it's so, it shows a level of care, and it really set me on a kind of course of finding out that architecture is not just the kind of big, great buildings, but it's the small things too. It's the thought that goes into making a door handle like this, the material, its tactile nature, its detail, the sort of beveled edges that give a sense of weight to it, the transparency of the glass, but the kind of fineness of its frame, the fact that the bits that you touch are very kind of warm in material. It's also very ergonomic to use. So all these things became my point of reference in terms of generosity within architecture. So this is a bit of a little quote from the piece I wrote for the AJ, which summarizes my view on what generosity, especially in the public realm, is. Architecture is about imagination. A building is a physical manifestation of a people and their aspirations. It is about making space that engages with the public, private, and everything in between. And lastly, it's about detail, the language of craft through which imagination and the making of space is expressed. So I'll be taking you on a kind of walk, made kind of just walking and photographing moments and incidences of generosity along the South Bank. So it's a very kind of short, tight walk, but a very rich walk. It's kind of across 4 buildings really, and the expansive kind of generosity you find here, I think it's what makes this such a vital and successful public space, especially you know, reflecting on this in the times that we're living in lockdown, and also increasingly the harsh realities, economic realities that London faces. So this photo here summarizes the first encounter of kind of generosity on the South Bank. You come up the stairs, which are slightly gangly to kind of negotiate, but then you land on this kind of sort of space between 2 buildings. It's a thoroughfare, but it's also a place. It's got a sense of scale, and it's got a kind of urban room quality to it. The buildings that on each side articulate a kind of intimacy to it. The recessed nature of the opening to the Royal Festival Hall provides a place to pause. The scale of kind of building elements also makes this kind of language of generosity in this thoroughfare. So that's taking something that is necessary. It's about getting from one place to another, but then articulating with something more than just the need to get from A to B. The doors, which I love, and seeing them actually in the larger context of the facade, you really do understand the sort of the scale of these handles and the kind of ways that this facade is constructed as a kind of threshold and opening, the care of which everything is layered and measured. There's a kind of simplicity, but also richness in the kind of expression of the windows and doors, and even the light kind of delicate framing of the objects that make up the facade. And I think also beyond that, there's, sadly, it's closed, we're locked down, but the Royal Festival Hall, I find an incredible space. The kind of, you know, the building is an institutional building, but it's also a thoroughfare. It's a gift to the city. It's one of the only places in London where you can do anything. You can walk in, you can spend a day working there. I've you know, been to amazing talks and lectures there. It's a real gift, and this kind of piazza continues into the building, and the kind of stage that's just beyond this threshold is part of that continuity of that public space. Again, I think that rhythm and generosity is applied across all its facades, and the very open ones give the sense that this is a building that belongs to the public. It's not just for the institution alone. And you read that generosity in the language and expression of the facade. I also think that looking at the detail is also important. So thinking about accessibility within the city. So not thinking about it as an afterthought, but actually thinking about how somebody that's in a wheelchair might access the building, and thinking about you know, how they will use a push plate and building that into the language of the door set. So it's not a kind of afterthought. It's not a kind of it's not seen as something extra, but it's built into the very function of the threshold to the building. I love this image. It's very simple, and it very much what I think generosity in the public realm is about. It's about space, it's about giving and making space. So this is a little plaque on a bench in the South Bank, and it just simply says, everybody needs a place to think. And the South Bank kind of provides that. It's, you know, this was a walk done on a very rainy day, typical of January in London, I'd say. But even then, there's still a kind of softness to this place. There's a kind of material, there's a kind of ordering, there's chaos, but it's also the chaos that makes this place. And the simple two benches that kind of are in this public space and invite you to just pause and maybe think. And I think that there's small moments like that really offer a sense of generosity in a city that can be quite ambiguous at times and quite lonely and challenging. And I really enjoyed this, the sort of little building that attaches itself to the bigger building. Again, this kind of generosity of almost like stage making. The buildings along the South Bank are very much articulated in that way. They're about kind of pronouncing themselves onto the kind of thoroughfare, but then also giving back to that thoroughfare. So there's a generosity in the kind of layering of these elevations and spaces made. And this kind of theme of kind of quiet spaces to be alone within the kind of larger public place occurs again and again as you kind of encounter different spaces within the South Bank. And I think that that's really important to the kind of ideas of generosity within the public realm. I think that there is a balance, there's a careful balance of kind of public, but also a need for privacy. And as I said in my article for the AJ, it's about the public, the private, but also everything else in between. And that tension of the public and private, I think, plays out quite nicely across the scale of the South Bank and its kind of spaces. And I think all these things don't feel like additions, they feel like part of the core essence of this place. Perhaps leaning to its kind of the time in which it was, this space was made. It was about celebrating Britain. It was about kind of, there was still an essence of kind of public life, which is sadly dwindling. I think that kind of dwindling is a response to kind of economic factors that are quite harsh and see every space must work and must produce capital. And there is no room for spaces that do not produce capital. And that's a real shame, because a city that is able to be generous is beyond just an economically functioning one, an economically rich one. It's useful to its residents. And I think that generosity must be thought about also in terms of care and making the lives of people easy. The economy serves us, not the other way around. And I think increasingly in this country, we forget that the economy serves people and that people are not at the mercy of the economy, or shouldn't be anyway. A kind of edge, an edge that's made to kind of create a buffer, but also frame the River Thames and the building elevations beyond it. It's rugged, it's big, it's, you know, things are made of chunky stuff. And it's about, you know, I remember leaning on this and feeling comforted, you know, that it's not flimsy, it's not kind of, you feel secure. And that kind of care in even the kind of rounded edges, that kind of soft, it almost beckons you towards it. And that kind of small moments, I think, formulate a kind of generosity that is quite beautiful in a city like this. And also the material, the kind of ruggedness of it holds weight, and there's a sort of safety that is alluded to through here. Again, returning to these kind of little buildings that puncture the public space and the kind of views they frame. There's something I really enjoy about this kind of moment before the underpass. I call it Book Bridge because that's where the booksellers normally are. And that kind of framing of that, there's a moment of pause before you kind of descend into a kind of dark part of the undercroft of the bridge. And there's a kind of, I think in this image, what I'm really drawn to here is a layering that's produced by the buildings, the infrastructure, the trees, the kind of paving, the kind of continuous kind of landscape almost of terrain that it makes, and this kind of uniformity, but also that uniformity is broken by texture and introduces something beyond the ordinary. It's not just kind of paving, it's got a kind of texture, it's got a grain, it's got a sense of life and a bit of joy to it as well. And I think that that's really important in thinking about generous spaces within the city. How can the material choices or the ways that we put things together articulate something beyond just the kind of need for, but actually something that goes beyond just providing need and ticking a box, but hopefully, you know, maybe just makes you just slow down a bit or smile or kind of just pause a bit before you make the next part of your journey. Bookbridge, I love this place. I think it's really, it's for me, the kind of generosity that the city can offer if it's made to think about spaces not just as fixed for one purpose, and there's a generosity in the use. This space is, you know, skateboarders, booksellers. It's also the space before the kind of BFI bar, which then spills over onto it. It just has a kind of, it feels like a room. It feels very sort of, yeah, safe within a kind of larger territory. And I think also what it really describes to me is this idea that public spaces, and to make public space, it's really about making space that has an essence of adaptation and can be, you know, there's a kind of, it's not over prescriptive and overly determined. And that allows a kind of the user to become also the author of the space. And I think that's an important thing in conceiving generosity. And I think that sometimes when we talk about economics, it's quite clear who the author of something is. They are the one in charge of setting the kind of economic measures they must meet. But what about the other people that use the space? How do they judge economy, or in my case, generosity in those spaces? And I think that a kind of generous architecture, civic architecture, is one that opens up an idea that the work isn't finished and the work is brought to life by people that use it, and the kind of spaces that are made invite a kind of difference in use. And sometimes they're very kind of, this authorship is not kind of big, large architectural ideas of complete buildings. It's kind of ad hoc ways of making do. And that's something rather beautiful, that kind of tables for bookselling can just be closed up, these kind of storage boxes. There's a certain kind of, there's an economy to this. There's a kind of need to make do, and that generates a different kind of economy to perhaps the things that we've been talking about this afternoon, that are about maybe more kind of fixed and determined ideas of economy. There's also the other side of economy, which is about making do, and this kind of being, thinking quickly and finding very quick solutions to things that also mean that there's not a kind of preciousness over them. They live, they exist, and when they have no use, they will go and something else will come in their place. And part of a kind of economy is being comfortable with those ideas, and not everything is permanent or fixed, and there's a generosity in negotiating those ideas. It's also a place for play. When I was walking there, it was empty, it's locked down, but it's moments like this that for me, it offers space for everyone. A kind of slightly mundane railing becomes a child's kind of plaything, and they occupy the space in their own way. And the sort of joy of the South Bank is, I think that it's the way that it articulates itself means that the scale suits almost everyone. It works for a child, it works for an adult, it works for a skateboarder, it works for a theatre goer. There's a kind of generosity in placemaking that means that it can be quite inclusive as a space, and also it stirs a certain imagination. This girl was one of several children I saw kind of hanging off things or kind of jumping off things, and there's a kind of inquisitiveness which this kind of generous sense of place and layered sense of space mean this kind of generous sense of space and this kind of layerdness means that it invites a kind of curiosity to explore the kind of place, to explore it tactilely, to touch things, to jump off things, to hang off things. It's not kind of flat, it's not kind of monotone, it's not got, you know, the trouble with kind of new public spaces sometimes is that they can feel quite generic and quite flat and quite they are made to achieve a kind of, you know, we've made some public space, rather than actually thinking beyond just the aesthetic value of it. That yes, it might not all be very beautiful, but it's very useful, and as long as people can find use in it, then it's generous. This piazza in front of the National Theatre is brilliant, and it's got the right scale. It's got corners, it's got edges. The building that faces it is wonderful. The materials are sort of gentle but robust at the same time, and it's just, I mean, I don't think the photograph does it justice, but you have to be there to kind of, if you put your arms out, you just feel that it's the right measure. It's got a kind of it feels very grounded as well, and it just feels like you are in a good space. It feels well judged. The proportions of things that surround it are very convincing. The edges to it are very convincing as well, and all the edges that make it feel like places that one can inhabit, like these 4 teenage boys inhabiting one of the edges to it, and they kind of, you know, by just their being there, their presence there transforms that space, and it shows how the space, what I'm talking about the kind of the edges of it that make space to dwell. And there's a kind of, that they were there as long as I was there, and they kind of, it just felt like a nice space that's covering the shelter, but there's also, it feels large, but it also feels intimate at the same time. And there's that is a really difficult thing to perhaps achieve, and I think it's just done really beautiful here. Even the kind of change in level, that softness and the change in level, the kind of different material, but it's not stark, it kind of moves and sort of feels very gradual and very thoughtful. I think all these things are really important, and in some ways there are lots of things that I only observed by being there. And this generosity is not always something that it's kind of, you can't always write it down and make it. Sometimes it's about just being there and feeling something, and then being able to then translate that kind of feeling into other works, or bring those ideas to other projects. And I think I enjoy walking, I enjoy looking, and I enjoy being in spaces, because I think that's where you really encounter kind of abundance of generosity in the city. And sometimes London can feel like a very kind of challenging place, especially in lockdown, when the things that we all enjoy about the city, being outside, being able to just move around, I sort of feel like we can't do that anymore. But moments like this kind of remind you that they are still spaces for joy in the city, and they come through the ways that they're made, the ways that things are articulated, and I think that's rather pleasant. And also this, the way that this space is layered means that it's got this kind of surprising three-dimensional quality to it, that it doesn't ever feel static. You look at it from one view, it changes as you move through a corner, and that's just quite extraordinary. The kind of layering of its structure and tectonic language produces this kind of surprise. There's a kind of, all the corners of the National Theatre to me always feel surprising. There's nothing I feel like I've seen before. Every time I go there, I'm like, was that always there? Was that always like that? And there's a kind of uncovering of it over time and time and time again. And I think that is, for me, the essence of a good civic, public and city building, that it changes. Every time you look at it, there's something more to be uncovered. It's not a kind of made thing. It reveals itself to you in pieces, because you don't see it all at once. You have to kind of engage with it. You have to be present in kind of thinking about the building and experiencing the building. It also makes it difficult to photograph for that reason. But I think that's also true of its kind of the way it asks you to be there and to kind of experience the space for itself. And one of the things I find really beautiful about it is even the kind of edges and the kind of leftover spaces feel useful. They feel kind of that while they might have not been designed for that very thing that are now contained or used for, they can be transformed quite easily. Shelter, bike storage, you know, a place to hide in the rain, all these things are part of a good building that even goes beyond its intended use. So even the leftover spaces still feel clever and feel generous. This is the understudy bar, which is brilliant. But also it's a moment that I think offers us a sense of that when you make buildings, you're not just making a kind of economic solution. So even the structure and tectonic language can be a moment to create space, to make space, to invite kind of dwelling, to invite somebody to sit for a while, to kind of stand for a while, or just to be there for a while. And this beautiful corner, I think, has so much in it for me. It has, you know, the kind of layering of it, the fact that you read a sense of weight in this building is quite beautiful. The kind of well-judged space between the two buildings, the kind of edges of it, the fact that there are different levels of thresholds and the conditions of those thresholds are varied. There's a window, there's a balcony, there's structure, there's overhangs. It's kind of loaded, but also feels very gentle. It doesn't feel aggressive. It doesn't feel like it's trying to encompass everything. There's just a kind of gentleness to it. There's a kind of I guess it has an essence, and that essence is followed through. So it produces a kind of precision in its kind of articulation as well. It's just how this building, these buildings then kind of inform the quality of the public space in front of them. And the public space in front of them are always affected by their relationships to the buildings and the kind of edges that they make to these buildings. And it's just quite remarkable. I think, again, like the first thoroughfare, this is another thoroughfare. But again, there's even a space to get you to another place is conceived with generosity. It's conceived of places to pause, trees, change of levels, materials, a kind of generous view over the River Thames. I think all these things become really important when we think about the kind of urban realm, that can we do more than just think of, I need to get this person from A to B. What is that journey like on the ground? And this is something that Richard and I talked about in terms of formulating my contribution to this, the kind of imagining economy in terms of the ground experience, the kind of human experience at ground level. And that's something that I think that sometimes can be forgotten when we're thinking kind of high level terms, in terms of what this does to this, the consequence of this cost cutting or this and that. Sometimes you know, the human experience is the quickest thing to be value engineered out, actually. And that is something that I think we all want to kind of see brought back into kind of the architecture and the kind of making of public spaces, especially. So the last two slides, I just wanted to kind of I suppose speak to what I think generosity involves. And for me, this work by Frank Dobson, the sculpture London Pride facing onto the Thames, is a kind of in the public space, in a kind of, even on a dull rainy day, sort of sparks some joy. Really for me cements the three things that generosity are about. It's about care, civicness, and community. And I think that especially care it feels like an important way to think about generosity within the city, especially in the times we find ourselves in. And what is generosity if it doesn't produce a kind of landscape of care and thinking about our relationships to one another? And I conclude with this image and kind of hoping that we'll all find ourselves back in these sorts of spaces, generous spaces, informed by kind of a relationship to the public and civic space, and that whether that be it, large institutional buildings, large kind of thoroughfares, or large public spaces, or intimate small pubs, and places to just be and sort of reflect on the generosity of public life.